But why? Diana hadn't even been involved in the case until after Thomas's death. How could he have known she'd be assigned? Unless someone else had added that pin. Someone who knew Diana would be taking over the investigation. Someone who wanted to send her a message. Diana raced back to the evidence logs. She reviewed everyone who'd had access to Thomas's basement after the initial discovery. Police officers, FBI agents, forensic techs, all vetted, all cleared, but there was one name that stood out. A consultant who'd been brought in to help with the fire investigation analysis. A retired fire investigator named Carl Morrison. He'd been in the basement for several hours, reviewing evidence, taking photographs. He'd submitted his report and left. Diana pulled Carl's background. He was 72 years old, retired for a decade, living on a modest pension. He'd been a respected investigator in his time, with hundreds of cases under his belt. Nothing in his record suggested any problems, but Diana had learned to trust her instincts. And something felt wrong. She started digging deeper. Carl had a daughter, Emily Morrison. Emily had died in a house fire 25 years ago. She'd been 8 years old. The fire had been ruled accidental, caused by a lightning strike during a storm. Diana pulled the case file. The lead investigator on that fire had been a young Thomas Carmichael, early in his career, before he'd become an insurance broker. Diana's hands started shaking as she read the report. Thomas had ruled it accidental, but the file contained notes from Carl Morrison, who'd reviewed the scene independently. Carl had disagreed with Thomas's findings. He'd believed the fire had been set deliberately. That evidence of accelerant use had been overlooked. He'd filed a formal complaint, demanding a reinvestigation. But Thomas's ruling had stood. The case had been closed. And Carl had never forgiven him. Diana now understood. Carl had known what Thomas was doing, or at least suspected. When Thomas's crimes finally came to light, Carl had seen his chance for revenge. He'd volunteered to consult on the case, gotten access to the evidence, and found Thomas before the FBI could arrest him. Carl had murdered Thomas, staged it as a suicide, and planted the confession to ensure Thomas was remembered as the monster he was. And Carl had added Diana's name to the list as a warning, a message that he was watching, that he knew who was investigating. Diana put out an alert for Carl Morrison. Officers were dispatched to his house. But when they arrived, the house was empty. Carl was gone. For 3 days, they searched. Then Diana received a package at her office. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. Agent Torres, the note read, "I'm sorry for frightening you. Your family was never in danger. Added your name to make sure you'd take this case seriously. That you'd dig deep enough to find all of Thomas's victims. He took my daughter from me 25 years ago, and he's been taking children ever since. Someone had to stop him. Someone had to make sure the truth came out. The USB drive contains evidence of 2 more fires I believe Thomas was involved in, fires from before he started his insurance scheme. Please find justice for those families too. I'll turn myself in when I'm ready. But first I need to know that every victim has been accounted for. Carl Morrison." Diana plugged in the USB drive. On it were files detailing 2 house fires from the 1990s, both involving children. Both ruled accidental, both investigated by Thomas Carmichael early in his career. The evidence Carl had compiled was circumstantial but compelling. Thomas's pattern of murder had started even earlier than they'd thought. Diana sat in her office as the sun set, staring at the files, and felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. 23 confirmed child victims, possibly more, 11 men manipulated into participating. Dozens of families destroyed, and 1 man so consumed by the need for revenge that he'd taken justice into his own hands. The media wanted answers. The families wanted closure. The prosecutors wanted to move forward with charges against Daniel Hawthorne and the other men Thomas had recruited, but Diana knew that the full truth was more complicated than any headline could capture. Daniel Hawthorne was sentenced to 15 years for arson and attempted murder. Robert Henshaw, James Sullivan, and Kevin Doyle received similar sentences. Though their lawyers argued they'd been manipulated and deserved leniency, the courts showed Little mercy. The families of the victims filed lawsuits against the insurance companies, demanding investigations into how such massive policies had been issued and why the fraud hadn't been detected sooner. Several insurance executives were forced to resign. New regulations were proposed. Detective Marcus Webb stood in that basement for nearly an hour before he could bring himself to touch anything. The air was stale and cold, and touched for weeks, maybe months. The single bulb overhead cast harsh shadows across the concrete walls, illuminating what could only be described as a command center for something unspeakable. The map dominated the far wall, stretching nearly 6 feet across. Red pins dotted cities throughout Iowa, Illinois, and Wisconsin. Next to each pin was a date written in black marker. Marcus moved closer, his hands trembling as he pulled out his phone to photograph everything. Next to the first pin, in Des Moines, was a date from 4 years ago, March 15th, 2020. Next to it, in small, neat handwriting, were the words Johnson family, 3 children, house fire, total loss. Marcus felt his breath catch. He pulled out his notebook and started writing. The second pin was in Rockford, Illinois, date, September 3, 2020, Martinez family, 2 children. Electrical fire, both deceased. The third pin was in Milwaukee. Date, January 22, 2021. Patterson family, 4 children, gas leak and fire, 3 deceased, 1 survivor. There were 11 pins in total. 11 families. 11 fires. The last pin was in Cedar Falls, dated September of this year, with the Carmichael name written next to it. But like the others, there was no note about deaths. Just a question mark. Marcus's mind was racing. If Thomas had been involved in all of these fires, all of these deaths, then the case had just exploded from attempted murder into something far worse. This was serial murder. This was a pattern of killing that had spanned years and crossed state lines. He called his chief immediately. Within 2 hours, the basement was swarming with FBI agents. The case had officially become federal. Special Agent Diana Torres took lead, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a reputation for solving impossible cases. She walked through the basement with the careful attention of someone who understood that every detail mattered. "We need to pull every file on every one of these fires," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "We need to know if they were all ruled accidental or if any were investigated as arson. We need victim information, insurance payouts, everything." The investigation shifted into high gear. Teams of agents began pulling cold case files from police departments across 3 states. What they discovered was staggering. The Johnson fire in Des Moines had been ruled accidental. A space heater left too close to curtains. The family had been asleep. 3 children died. The parents survived but were left financially devastated until the insurance payout came through. $1 million per child. The fire investigator at the time had noted some irregularities in the burn patterns, but had ultimately concluded it was a tragic accident. The Martinez fire in Rockford had also been ruled accidental. Faulty wiring in the walls. 2 children died in their sleep. The parents had been out for their anniversary dinner. Insurance payout, $1.5 million per child. Again, the investigator had noted some unusual aspects but found no definitive proof of arson. One by one, the pattern emerged. Every fire had been ruled accidental. Every fire had resulted in the deaths of children. Every family had significant life insurance policies. And in every case, there were small irregularities that investigators at the time had noted but not pursued. But there was something else, something that made Diana's blood run cold. In each case, there had been a hero. Someone who had tried to save the children, who had rushed into the flames, who had been celebrated in the local media. In Des Moines, it had been a neighbor, a volunteer firefighter named Robert Henshaw. In Rockford, it had been an off-duty paramedic named James Sullivan. In Milwaukee, it had been a police officer named Kevin Doyle. Diana pulled their records. All 3 men had significant deaths. All 3 had taken out life insurance policies on themselves shortly before the fires. All 3 had survived their rescue attempts with minor injuries, and all 3 had received modest financial rewards or donations from grateful communities. Margaret hesitated. Linda Chen, Diana felt the room spin. Linda Chen, the fire investigator who discovered the gasoline in the Carmichael house. The woman who'd started this entire investigation. Are you sure? Diana demanded. I'm looking at it right now, Margaret said. Thomas wrote L. Chen, Cedar Falls Fire Department, keep close. Diana hung up and immediately pulled Linda Chen's file. She'd been a fire investigator for 15 years, highly respected, never a hint of corruption. But if she'd been working with Thomas, if she'd been helping him cover up fires while pretending to investigate them, then everything changed. Diana's phone rang. It was the office. Agent Torres, you need to get down here now. We just received a call. There's been another fire. Diana felt ice in her veins. Where? Linda Chen's house. The fire department is on scene now. They're saying it looks like arson. Diana drove through the night, her mind racing. When she arrived at Linda's house, it was fully engulfed. Flames shooting through the roof. Firefighters were battling the blaze, but it was clear the house would be a total loss. The fire chief approached Diana, his face grim. We can't get inside yet. But neighbors reported seeing Linda go in about an hour ago. We haven't seen her come out. Diana watched the flames, and she knew Carl Morrison had struck again. He'd figured out Linda's involvement before Diana had, and he delivered his own form of justice. When the fire was finally extinguished and investigators could enter, they found Linda's body in the upstairs bedroom. Next to her was a laptop, miraculously protected by a fireproof safe that had been left open. On the laptop was a video file, dated that evening. Diana watched the video with a growing sense of horror. It was Linda, recording a confession. She explained everything. How she'd met Thomas 15 years ago at a conference. How he'd recruited her, promised her a share of the profits if she helped him make fires look accidental. How she'd falsified reports, destroyed evidence, and steered investigations away from the truth. But Linda's confession was made under duress. The camera angle showed that someone was standing behind her, just out of frame, holding something. Linda's eyes kept darting to whoever was there, and her voice shook with fear as she spoke. At the end of the video, Linda looked directly into the camera. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry for what I did. For all those children. I can't live with it anymore. Then the video cut to black. Diana knew Carl Morrison had been there, had forced Linda to confess, and had then set the fire. But this time, there was evidence. A forensic analysis of the video showed a reflection in a window behind Linda. The reflection showed a figure, an old man with white hair and a weathered face. They had Carl Morrison's image. They had his voice on the audio track, faintly giving Linda instructions on what to say. They had proof he was killing people. An arrest warrant was issued, but Diana wondered if they'd ever find Carl alive. He was a man on a mission, and he wouldn't stop until every person involved in his daughter's death and the deaths of all those other children had been held accountable. Diana went back to the basement command center one more time. She stood in front of the map with all its red pins, all its dates, all its names. 23 confirmed victims. Thomas Carmichael dead. Linda Chen dead. 11 men in prison. And one vigilante still out there, somewhere, deciding who deserved to die for their crimes. Diana touched the pin that bore her family's name and carefully removed it. She'd keep it as a reminder of how close evil had come to her own door, and how sometimes the line between justice and vengeance became so blurred that even good people couldn't tell the difference anymore. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It contained just 3 words: to more left. Diana stared at the message, her blood running cold. Carl Morrison wasn't finished. There were still people involved in this conspiracy, people they hadn't identified yet, and Carl knew who they were. The hunt was far from over. Margaret hesitated. Linda Chen. Diana felt the room spin. Linda Chen, the fire investigator who discovered the gasoline in the Carmichael house. The woman who'd started this entire investigation. Are you sure? Diana demanded. I'm looking at it right now, Margaret said. Thomas wrote L. Chen, Cedar Falls Fire Department, keep close. Diana hung up and immediately pulled Linda Chen's file. She'd been a fire investigator for 15 years, highly respected, never a hint of corruption. But if she'd been working with Thomas, if she'd been helping him cover up fires while pretending to investigate them, then everything changed. Diana's phone rang. It was the office. "Agent Torres, you need to get down here now. We just received a call. There's been another fire." Diana felt ice in her veins. "Where?" "Linda Chen's house. The fire department is on scene now. They're saying it looks like arson." Diana drove through the night, her mind racing. When she arrived at Linda's house, it was fully engulfed. Flames shooting through the roof. Firefighters were battling the blaze, but it was clear the house would be a total loss. The fire chief approached Diana, his face grim. "We can't get inside yet. But neighbors reported seeing Linda go in about an hour ago. We haven't seen her come out." Diana watched the flames, and she knew Carl Morrison had struck again. He'd figured out Linda's involvement before Diana had, and he delivered his own form of justice. When the fire was finally extinguished and investigators could enter, they found Linda's body in the upstairs bedroom. Next to her was a laptop, miraculously protected by a fireproof safe that had been left open. On the laptop was a video file, dated that evening. Diana watched the video with a growing sense of horror. It was Linda, recording a confession. She explained everything. How she'd met Thomas 15 years ago at a conference. How he'd recruited her, promised her a share of the profits if she helped him make fires look accidental. How she'd falsified reports, destroyed evidence, and steered investigations away from the truth. But Linda's confession was made under duress. The camera angle showed that someone was standing behind her, just out of frame, holding something. Linda's eyes kept darting to whoever was there, and her voice shook with fear as she spoke. At the end of the video, Linda looked directly into the camera. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for what I did. For all those children. I can't live with it anymore." Then the video cut to black. Diana knew Carl Morrison had been there, had forced Linda to confess, and had then set the fire. But this time, there was evidence. A forensic analysis of the video showed a reflection in a window behind Linda. The reflection showed a figure, an old man with white hair and a weathered face. They had Carl Morrison's image. They had his voice on the audio track, faintly giving Linda instructions on what to say. They had proof he was killing people. An arrest warrant was issued, but Diana wondered if they'd ever find Carl alive. He was a man on a mission, and he wouldn't stop until every person involved in his daughter's death and the deaths of all those other children had been held accountable. Diana went back to the basement command center one more time. She stood in front of the map with all its red pins, all its dates, all its names. 23 confirmed victims. Thomas Carmichael dead. Linda Chen dead. 11 men in prison. And one vigilante still out there, somewhere, deciding who deserved to die for their crimes. Diana touched the pin that bore her family's name and carefully removed it. She'd keep it as a reminder of how close evil had come to her own door, and how sometimes the line between justice and vengeance became so blurred that even good people couldn't tell the difference anymore. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It contained just 3 words: "To more left." Diana stared at the message, her blood running cold. Carl Morrison wasn't finished. There were still people involved in this conspiracy, people they hadn't identified yet, and Carl knew who they were. The hunt was far from over. Diana Torres didn't sleep that night. She sat in her home office, her service weapon on the desk beside her, staring at those 3 words on her phone screen until they burned into her vision. To more left. Her children were safe, sleeping in the rooms down the hall, guarded by 2 FBI agents she trusted with her life. But who else had been involved? Who else would Carl consider guilty enough to die? It was buried in Linda Chen's falsified fire reports, a pattern so subtle she'd almost missed it, in 6 of the 11 fires. Linda had requested consultation from the same structural engineer to assess building integrity and fire spread patterns. The engineer's reports had all supported Linda's conclusions that the fires were accidental, caused by faulty wiring or equipment failure. The email was to his wife, who was visiting her sister in California. "I'm sorry," it read. "I've done terrible things. I will," Diana promised. Carl Morrison closed his eyes and never opened them again. The case officially closed 6 months later. All of the conspirators were convicted. All of the victims' families had been notified. The insurance settlements had been paid. The policy changes had been implemented. But Diana knew the case would never really be closed. She'd carry it with her forever. The weight of all those lost children, the complexity of Carl Morrison's grief-driven vengeance, the thin line between justice and revenge. She kept the red pin that had borne her daughter's name on her desk, a reminder of how close evil had come to her own family and how fragile the protections were that separated the innocent from those who would harm them. On the anniversary of Emily Morrison's death, Diana drove to the cemetery where Emily was buried. She'd learned that Carl had been buried next to his daughter, a request in his will that had been honored despite his crimes. Diana stood before their graves. Two simple headstones side by side. Emily Morrison, beloved daughter. Carl Morrison, loving father. She placed flowers on both graves and whispered a prayer for them both. For Emily, taken too soon by a monster's greed. For Carl, driven to become something he wasn't by a grief that never healed. Then Diana drove home to her own daughter, held Sophia tight, and thanked whatever power existed in the universe that her child was safe, that she'd been able to stop Carl before more blood was shed, and that somehow, despite everything, justice had been served. But late that night, after Sophia was asleep and the house was quiet, Diana's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her blood ran cold as she read it. "You thought it was over." Carl wasn't working alone. Diana and her team arrived at dawn with a warrant. The manager opened the unit, and Diana's flashlight illuminated what was inside. Boxes, dozens of them, each labeled with a name and date. She opened the first one and found files, photographs, and detailed plans. But these files weren't in Thomas's handwriting. They were someone else's. Someone who'd been planning to continue Thomas's work after he was gone. Diana's phone rang. And no number. "Did you find them?" a voice asked. Male, middle-aged, calm. "Who was this?" Diana demanded. "Someone who believes Thomas had the right idea but lacked vision. He was small-time. Agent Torres. 23 children over 25 years. That's nothing. I've been documenting vulnerable families for a decade. There are thousands of them. Millions in insurance payouts waiting to be claimed. And you can't stop all of them." "We'll find you," Diana said. The voice laughed. "You haven't even figured out who I am yet. But you will. Eventually. Maybe after another 23 children die. Maybe after 100. How long will it take, Agent Torres? How many dead children before you put the pieces together?" The line went dead. Diana stood in that storage unit surrounded by boxes of evil, plans for murders that hadn't happened yet, and realized with a sick certainty that the case wasn't over. It would never be over. Because evil didn't die with Thomas Carmichael or Carl Morrison or Warren Butler. It evolved. It adapted. It found new faces and new methods. And somewhere out there, someone was already lighting the next match. Diana looked at her team, saw the same horrified realization in their eyes, and knew that the real investigation was just beginning. The hunt for the children's killer hadn't ended. It had only entered a new, darker phase. And this time, they were already 20 steps behind. Diana knew what this meant. Carl was escalating. He wasn't just killing anymore. He was making his victims disappear, leaving behind only their confessions as evidence of their guilt. A search was organized, dozens of officers and volunteers combing the area around the rest stop. For 2 days they found nothing. Then a call came in from a farmer whose property bordered a state forest. He'd found something disturbing in one of his back fields. Diana drove out there with Marcus Webb, who'd requested to stay on the case despite it being federal now. What they found was a makeshift grave, shallow and hastily covered. Inside was David Pearson's body. He'd been shot once in the back of the head, execution style. No signs of torture, no signs of struggle. It had been quick and efficient. "He's not making them suffer," Marcus observed quietly. "He's just eliminating them." Diana nodded. Carl Morrison wasn't a sadist. He was a father seeking justice for his daughter, and in his mind, these people deserved to die but not to be tortured. It was a cold, calculated kind of vengeance. "To more left," Diana repeated, staring at David's grave. Carl knew about David. Who's the second person? They went back through everything again. Every financial record, every email, every phone call. The conspiracy had involved Thomas, Linda, David, and 11 desperate men Thomas had recruited to set the fires. But those men were all in custody. Who else could there be? The answer came from an unexpected source. Robert Henshaw, the first man Thomas had recruited back in Des Moines, requested to speak with Diana. He'd been in federal prison for 3 weeks now. And according to the guards, he'd been a model prisoner, quiet and cooperative. Clearly racked with guilt over what he'd done, Diana sat across from him in the prison interview room. Robert looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. His eyes were hollow, his hands shaking as he clasped them on the table. "I need to tell you something," Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something I didn't mention before because I was scared and I didn't think it mattered. But I've been watching the news, seeing what's happening, and I realize it does matter." Diana leaned forward. "What is it, Robert?" "Before the fire, before everything, Thomas introduced me to someone. He said this person was his business partner. Someone who helped him identify families who needed insurance. Who helped process the policies, I only met him once, at a coffee shop. Thomas wanted us to meet so I'd know there was someone else involved. Someone who'd make sure I got paid after the fire. Diana's pulse quickened. Who was it? His name was Gregory Walsh. He worked for Midwest Family Insurance, the company that underwrote most of the policies Thomas sold. Thomas said Gregory had access to all the policy information, that he could make sure claims were processed quickly and quietly. Gregory told me that night that I was doing a good thing, that sometimes people needed help, and this was a way to provide it. He made it sound almost noble. Diana immediately pulled records for Midwest Family Insurance. Gregory Walsh was a senior claims adjuster, had been with the company for 18 years. He'd processed dozens of claims during his tenure, including 9 of the 11 fires on Thomas's lists. The total value of those claims was over $15 million. She cross-referenced Gregory's bank accounts. Over the past 4 years, he'd made deposits totaling nearly $2 million, always in amounts just below the $10,000 threshold that would trigger automatic reporting. The deposits coincided with the insurance payouts from the fires. Gregory Walsh had been taking a cut of every death benefit, funneling money from the insurance company into his own accounts while helping Thomas and Linda cover up the murders. Diana immediately sent agents to Gregory's office at Midwest Family Insurance in Des Moines, but when they arrived, Gregory's supervisor informed them that Gregory had called in sick that morning. He hadn't shown up for work, which was unusual because Gregory never missed work. He was obsessively punctual. Agents rushed to Gregory's home, a modest ranch house in a quiet suburb. The front door was locked, the curtains drawn. They announced themselves and received no response. They breached the door. The room went silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. When I got there and heard that woman screaming about children inside, Daniel's voice broke. I realized what I'd done. I had to get them out. I had to fix it. Marcus felt sick. You set a house on fire for insurance money, and you almost killed 2 innocent children. Daniel buried his face in his hands. I wanted to die. I wanted it to look like I died trying to save someone, so my family would get the money. I thought the house was empty, I swear, but the evidence told a darker story. When forensics examined the gasoline can more closely, they found Daniel's fingerprints. And something else. On the back door of the Carmichael house, investigators found fresh scratches on the lock, suggesting someone had picked it. Daniel had the skills. As a police officer, he'd been trained in forced entry, and then they found the searches on Daniel's personal computer. Deleted but recoverable. Searches from 2 weeks before the fire. Carmichael family schedule. When are Carmichael parents traveling? Home security bypass. Daniel hadn't just thought the house was empty. He'd researched the family. He'd planned this. And somewhere in that plan, something had gone catastrophically wrong. But when they pulled phone records and dug even deeper into Daniel's life, they found text messages. Messages to someone whose number was registered under a fake name. Messages talking about the plan and making sure no one is home and half the payout. Daniel hadn't been working alone. Marcus stared at the messages, his blood running cold. Who were you texting? He demanded. Daniel looked up, genuine fear in his eyes for the first time. I can't tell you that. If I tell you, I'm a dead man. You're already looking at attempted murder and arson charges, Daniel. Who was helping you? But before Daniel could answer, his lawyer arrived and shut down the interrogation. Marcus left the room, his mind racing. He had Daniel on arson and attempted murder, but there was someone else involved, someone Daniel was afraid of. Someone who might have been the one to ensure that the children were home that night, turning Daniel's suicide for insurance scheme into something far more sinister. Marcus went back to his desk and pulled up the phone number from Daniel's messages. It took 3 days of warrants and tracing, but finally, he got a name. The number belonged to Thomas Carmichael, the father of the children Daniel had saved, the man who'd called Daniel a hero and an angel. Marcus felt the floor drop out from under him. Thomas Carmichael had been in on it, but why? Why would a father set up a situation where his own children could die? Marcus obtained Thomas's financial records. What he found made his stomach turn. Thomas had taken out a massive life insurance policy on his children 6 months earlier, $2 million each. If those children had died in the fire, Thomas would have collected for $1 million, and if Daniel had died trying to save them, he'd have been remembered as a hero. His ex-wife would get $500,000, and Thomas would split his payout with Daniel's family, as the messages suggested. But Daniel had survived. The children had survived. And now the whole twisted scheme was unraveling. Marcus raced to bring Thomas in for questioning, but when officers arrived at the hotel where Thomas was supposedly staying in Chicago, he was gone. He checked out the morning after the fire and hadn't been seen since. An all-points bulletin went out. Thomas Carmichael was wanted for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and insurance fraud. His face was on every news channel. The same channels that had celebrated Daniel as a hero just days before. The story exploded. The hero cop was an arsonist. The grieving father was a would-be murderer. The nation that had celebrated Daniel's bravery now recoiled in horror at the truth. But Thomas remained missing. Days turned into a week. Investigators searched his bank accounts, his credit cards, his phone records. Nothing. He'd vanished. Then, on a cold October morning, a hunter in the woods 30 miles outside Cedar Falls found a body. It was hanging from a tree, a belt around its neck. The face was bloated and discolored, but the wallet in the pocket identified him. Thomas Carmichael had taken his own life, in his car, parked a quarter-mile from where his body was found. Police discovered a laptop. On it was a confession, typed but not sent, explaining everything: the financial desperation, the plan with Daniel, the insurance policies, and something else, something that made the entire case even darker. Thomas had known the children would be home that night. He'd told Daniel the house would be empty, but he deliberately arranged for the kids to be there. His plan had been for them to die, for Daniel to die trying to save them, and for him to collect the insurance money and disappear, starting a new life somewhere far away. Daniel had been a pawn, manipulated by a man even more desperate and cruel than he was. But when investigators opened the file on Thomas's computer labeled backup plan, they found something that sent chills through everyone involved. It was a list. Names and addresses. Other families. Other children. Other officers Thomas had been researching. If this plan had failed, he'd intended to try again. With someone else, somewhere else. Marcus stood in the evidence room, staring at that list, and felt a darkness settle over him that wouldn't lift for years. They'd stopped Thomas and Daniel. They'd saved those children, but when they opened the locked basement door of Thomas's actual house, the one he'd owned before moving to the Maple Street rental, what they found changed everything. Inside were files, dozens of them, photographs of children, insurance documents, burner phones, and on the wall, a map with red pins marking locations across 3 states. Thomas Carmichael hadn't just planned to kill his own children. He'd been doing this for years.